A coin toss before the broadcast has determined that Lieutenant Governor Anthony Brown will begin first with opening statements. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Vic and Andy. I want to thank the sponsors, WJZ, MPT, and the Baltimore Sun. I want to thank our audience here in the studio and that are watching this broadcast. Look, Maryland's a great state, and together we've accomplished a great deal in the last several years. We've built the best in the nation public schools. We lead the nation in college affordability. We've driven crime down to levels we haven't seen in 4 decades, and we're only one of 6 states who have come through the Great Recession with a AAA bond rating. But let's be clear, this election is not about the past and where we've been. This election is about the future and what's next for Maryland. I spent 30 years in the Army. I had the opportunity to lead soldiers, to train them, to care for soldiers and their families, to send them on missions, and often in some very unforgiving environments, giving them the leadership, the training, the resources that they could complete their mission, come home safely to their families and the nation that we all love. I had the privilege of serving with patriotic men and women on campaigns in service to our country. Today I'm on a different mission with Ken Ullman. The fight is different, but it's just as important to Maryland families, because this November, voters are going to decide. They're going to make a choice. Do we wake up every morning fighting for working families and middle-class values? And that's the vision that Ken Ullman and I share with so many Marylanders. Or do we wake up favoring a small group of the largest, wealthiest corporations who need the help the least at the expense of the middle class? Ken Ullman and I will wake up every day with you, Maryland, to fight for working families and middle-class values.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. And now to the Republican candidate, Larry Hogan.
Well, first, I'd like to thank WJZ and the Baltimore Sun for giving us this opportunity. And I'd like to thank all of you at home for caring enough to take the time to watch. Folks, I'm not a professional politician. I'm just a small businessman and a lifelong Marylander who loves this state. And I'm running for governor because I'm really fed up with politics as usual in Annapolis, and because I believe that our state is way off track and heading in the wrong direction. 40 consecutive tax hikes have taken an additional $10 billion out of the pockets of struggling Maryland families and small businesses, and it's crushed our economy. We've lost 8,000 small businesses. Unemployment has doubled. 200,000 Marylanders are out of work. We're third in the nation in foreclosures. We've had zero economic growth, and our state economy ranks 49th out of 50 states. We've had the largest mass exodus of taxpayers fleeing our state, of any state in the Mid-Atlantic region, and one of the worst in the nation. And sadly, nearly half of all Marylanders want to leave the state. Folks, that's simply unacceptable. The people of Maryland deserve better. That's why I'm running for governor, and that's why I need your help and your vote so that we can turn this economy around and bring real change to Annapolis.
Okay, gentlemen, let's get right to the questioning. First, Mr. Brown, it seems to be the consensus of people that we've heard from that taxes in Maryland are simply too high. For example, Susie in Linthicum asked that if you're elected, will you commit to lowering taxes, or at least commit to not raising taxes or creating new taxes for individual taxpayers and families?
Let me be clear. I don't see the need, nor as governor of Maryland, to raise taxes. There will be no new taxes in the Brown-Ullman administration. Let's complete the picture. We were faced with 40% increase in college tuition, overcrowded classrooms, the most congested streets on the highway, and Marylanders did their part to protect our schools, safe neighborhoods, and the environment, all so that we can ensure that we have a vibrant economy and communities to attract families and business to Maryland. There will be no new taxes. What I propose, and in fact I think Mr. Hogan and I agree in the need for tax relief, but where we differ is that my tax relief starts with the middle class. It starts with small and entrepreneurial businesses, the innovators and the job creators. Small businesses create 2 out of every 3 jobs in Maryland. In fact, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce looks at our small entrepreneurial business community and ranks it #1 in the country. That's where we start. Small businesses that create 2 out of every 3 middle-class jobs. What I disagree with is Mr. Hogan's approach, where he begins by providing a $300 million tax giveaway annually to the smallest group of the largest corporations, many of them headquartered out of the state of Maryland, who need it the least. In a Brown-Ullman administration, We'll fight for working families and middle-class jobs, which means we're supporting small and entrepreneurial businesses with targeted tax credits so that they can create the jobs that put Marylanders to work.
Mr. Hogan, your response.
Well, what the Lieutenant Governor just said really sounds pretty good. Unfortunately, it's the complete opposite of his 8-year record of failure. You can't say that you're going to help middle-class families and struggling Marylanders when for the past 8 years you've passed 40 consecutive tax hikes that are crushing struggling Maryland families. Most of the 40 tax increases that you and your partner Martin O'Malley have pushed have hit people at the lowest end of the income scale the most. Those are the people that are struggling. I'm out there every day. I've been from one end of the state to the other. People have had enough. 71% of the people in Maryland think taxes are too high. It's the primary focus of my campaign. And there you go again with this nonsense about the corporate giveaways. Look, I've talked about the fact that we need to roll back as many of these 40 tax increases as possible, and 38 of them are regressive taxes that hurt people at the lowest end of the income scale. You know, if you want to talk about corporate giveaways, you're the one that's talking about giving away special tax credits for specific corporations and big corporations. I'm talking about tax release for all Marylanders. And quite frankly, the corporate giveaways we're having now are we're giving away our corporations to Virginia. We're giving them away to North Carolina. We're giving them away to other states because they're all fleeing our state. We've lost 8,000 businesses. Taxpayers in Maryland are suffering. They just can't take it anymore, and that's exactly why I'm running. You say you now agree, but why haven't you done anything about it for the past 8 years? That's the question. I mean, you've been in charge. You and Martin O'Malley presided over the largest tax increases in history. And now you say you're going to have a blue ribbon commission to review tax reform. You know when the last time we heard that was? In 2007, right before the largest tax increases in history. You know, we don't need more of that. We need real tax cuts.
Mr. Brown, rebuttal.
So what Marylanders remember, and they don't want to go back to, was the largest expansion in state government under your administration, $300 billion in increases in tax and fees, and you jacked up college tuition by 40%. As the appointment secretary, you appointed 10 of the 14 members to the Board of Regents that voted to increase college tuition by 40%. You left classrooms overcrowded, no plan to reduce congestion on the streets of the roads of Maryland. Marylanders remember those days, and they do not want to go back to those days. But this is not about the past. This is about the future. There'll be no new taxes in a Brown-Ullman administration. There'll be targeted tax credits for small businesses. I think about a small business success story in Maryland. Started in his grandparents' garage, and just 3 weeks ago announced that he eclipsed Adidas to be the #2 sports apparel company in the world. That's Under Armour, and that's a Maryland success story. Under Armour in its early years had targeted tax credits. They grow, they nurtured with a competitive workforce, and they're now the #2 sports apparel company in the world.
Okay. Andy?
During the last decade, Maryland has significantly increased its investment in K-12 education, a policy that is presently under a periodic review. Meanwhile, Baltimore City recently got approval for a novel school construction funding plan that will enable them to rapidly accelerate the replacement of aging buildings, a policy other counties have said they would be interested in following. Could you please evaluate for me the effectiveness and affordability of Maryland's spending on education and outline any changes you think would be necessary going forward?
Well, I think we've done a good job in spending money for education. In fact, it started with the Ehrlich administration and continued with this administration. We've doubled spending on education here in Maryland, but I would say the results have been mixed at best. First of all, we have some of the best schools in the country here in Maryland. But unfortunately, we've got some of the lowest performing schools in the country as well. And the gap between the best schools and the worst schools is 50th in the nation. And the gap between white students and minority students is the largest in the nation. Both of those gaps have gotten wider over the past 8 years. So we need to invest money, but we've also got to look at other ways to improve education. I want to push more dollars down to the local level rather than having them eaten up in administrative costs, put them into the classrooms. I want to make more decisions at the local level with parents, students, and teachers. We're going to push the pause button on Common Core, which has been a complete disaster at this point. Our recent test scores are some of the worst in recent memory. I want to push for charter schools. We're 50th in the nation in charter schools right now, and I believe every single child in Maryland deserves a quality education, and we've got to work hard to try to make sure that that happens.
Mr. Brown.
Once again, we agree. I agree that every child in Maryland deserves access to a world-class education. And we've made tremendous progress in doing that. I do take issues with your facts. We're closing the achievement gap on income faster than any state in the nation, and we're making very good progress on eliminating the achievement gap along racial and ethnic lines. It's because, and I think this is what your question, Andy, goes to, the resources that we're willing to invest in our schools. Look, in my vision for a world-class education, that starts with investments in pre-K education. I think that every Maryland 4-year-old should have access to quality pre-K, because if you ask a university president or a kindergarten teacher, how do we best prepare kids for college readiness or the workforce, they all start with expanding pre-K. Mr. Hogan opposes the expansion of pre-K. He says we can't afford it. I say we can't afford not to do it. I also support investments in school construction. We're not going to raise taxes to do it, and we won't jeopardize our AAA bond rating. But we have the ability with our AAA bond rating in Maryland to make investments in schools, and we have. I supported the $1.1 billion investment in Baltimore City. I look forward to working with Baltimore County, Montgomery County, Prince George's County, and every county executive that wants to look for opportunities to deliver modern technology-ready classrooms. But Mr. Hogan opposes that as well. In fact, in his most recent so-called savings plan, he calls for a $450 million cut to school construction. That would set us back years as we move children out of temporary learning trailers into technology-ready classrooms so that they can receive the instruction that prepares them for college or the workforce. Your $450 million school construction cut would take Maryland back to a place that they do not want to go.
Mr. Hogan, your opportunity for rebuttal.
Well, first of all, there he goes again, confusing the facts. I support pre-K, number one. He runs commercials saying that I don't support pre-K and that I'm going to take $300 million out of the pockets of kids and I'm going to give it to rich corporations. That's obviously not true. I'm a big proponent of pre-K. We currently expanded pre-K to people that make 300% of the poverty level, so $73,000 per year. What the Lieutenant Governor's talking about is expanding it to pay for everybody in the entire state, but he doesn't really have a plan about how to accomplish that, and he's not talking about how to pay for it. And he's actually not talking about making this happen until 2022. So basically it's a campaign promise that he's trying to mislead voters into thinking he's going to make happen, and I'm not. When in fact we both support the concept and the idea of pre-K. And the fact of the matter is, politicians make phony promises all the time that they can't deliver. I'm just a small businessman. I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. So when I said, I'm not sure how we're going to afford it at this point, when we've got a $405 million shortfall, we've got a structural deficit, we've increased spending during your administration by $10 billion. And now you're proposing $7 billion in new spending.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Mr. Hogan. Moving on now, next question. In a recent news conference, the Maryland Comptroller blasted the state's economy and talked about a projected shortfall in revenue. People like Teresa down in Crownsville ask, if elected, how would you address the fiscal challenges facing the state? Mr. Brown.
Sure. Thank you, Teresa. I can certainly assure you that while I agree with a lot of the things that the Comptroller says, I don't agree with him when he says we're going to raise taxes. We will not raise taxes in a Brown-Ullman administration. Look, we've got a AAA bond rating. We've created 16,000 jobs in the state. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce recognizes our small entrepreneurial business community as #1 in the country. We are going to ensure that through targeted tax credits and business tax deductions that we can support small and entrepreneurial businesses that create 2 out of every 3 jobs in Maryland. These are middle-class jobs and opportunities for working families. The other thing that we're going to do is to make sure that in order to be able to offer those tax credits and reliefs to middle-class families and to small and entrepreneurial businesses, we're going to look at spending. And again, Mr. Hogan and I agree here that we need to look at spending in government, but we fundamentally disagree on how we do that. My plan calls for strategic resourcing. It talks for cooperative purchase agreements with counties so that we can get more value at a lower cost. Our vehicle fleet management, continuing to make strides in efficiencies and reducing our expenditures in Medicaid. And now we've just shifted to a new state employee health plan that's going to save us millions of dollars as we require state employees to focus more on wellness and prevention and less on chronic disease management. My savings plan is considerably different than Mr. Hogan's so-called savings plan, which not only cuts $450 million from school construction, but also calls for a $300 million increase in the property tax base. That's what your so-called savings plan does?
Mr. Hogan?
Well, first of all, almost everything the Lieutenant Governor just said wasn't true. First of all, he keeps saying he doesn't want to look at the past. He only want to look to the future. And he doesn't want to talk about his 8-year record of failure. I mean, over the past 8 years, it's a failed record of lost businesses, lost jobs, higher spending, and record tax increases. You know, you increase spending by $10 billion. That's more than, at a rate faster than 46 other states. Only 3 states in the country raised spending the way you did. You raised 40 taxes in a row that took $10 billion out of the pockets of struggling Maryland families. And you know, the last time that you said, well, there's not going to be any taxes, we don't foresee any taxes in the future, was in the last election, when you and Martin O'Malley said exactly the same thing. And then you raised 40 taxes in a row. That crushed Maryland families and small businesses. Folks, it's not about what somebody says, it's about what they've done. We've got to look, I mean, the Lieutenant Governor is asking for a major promotion. But he doesn't want us to look at his record. And I think we've got to look to the past 8 years to say what's actually happened. You can't say you're going to cut spending when you've increased spending by more than almost anybody in the country. You can't say you're going to cut taxes, you're not going to raise taxes, when that's exactly what you've done. You've proposed in this campaign something like $7 billion in new spending. And here's a fact for you. Without you doing anything else, the Brown-O'Malley tax increases that have already taken $10 billion out of our struggling Maryland families' pockets is going to double over the next 4 years to $20 billion. It's going to cost the average Maryland family $9,200 more per year, thanks to you and Martin O'Malley raising taxes. That's before you start to add new taxes to pay for all your new spending. Look, I'm running because I want to get the government off our backs and out of our pockets so we can grow the private sector, put people back to work, and turn our economy around. That's the exact opposite of what's happened over the past 8 years.
Thank you, Mr. Hogan. Rebuttal, Mr. Brown.
Thank you. Let's talk about the record. Over the course of the last 8 years, led the base realignment and closure effort. We brought 40,000 jobs to Maryland. Let's talk about record. I spearheaded the effort in Maryland to create a framework for public-private partnerships where we attract not only private sector dollars, but private sector ingenuity. Projects like the $140 million private sector investment in the Port of Baltimore that created 5,000 jobs. Not only those jobs, but 1,200 jobs coming to the port with Amazon's fulfillment center. BMW just announced that it's bringing increased volume of cars and increased jobs to the port. You know, Larry, the only plan that you've rolled out on this campaign, because you talk about sort of like woe is to Maryland's economy, the only plan is your so-called savings plan, which is riddled with incompetence. It includes a $450 million cut to school construction, increase in the property tax base. You talk about cutting taxes, you're talking about in your so-called plan, increasing the property tax base by $300 million. Okay. And you got a rounding error. This is not Anthony Brown. The Baltimore Sun did an independent analysis and said that your numbers don't add up.
A rounding area is when you say that you cut
rounding area, $100 million rounding area?
I'm sorry, gentlemen, but
a rounding area is when you say you cut $8 billion and you actually increase $10 billion. That's an $18 billion rounding area.
All right. Andy.
Moving on to the environment. Maryland is under an Environmental Protection Agency mandated stormwater diet, or a pollution diet, to clean up the Chesapeake Bay. We've taken a number of steps, including the stormwater management fee. What would be your administration's approach toward the EPA mandate?
Well, here's the issue. Number one, the Chesapeake Bay is our most valued asset, and it's a treasure for not only Maryland, but for the entire country. Cleaning up the bay is going to be a top priority of the Hogan-Rutherford administration. But we're going to go about it entirely different than this administration. Rather than just blaming farmers and watermen and the rain that falls on the roof of your house, we're going to take other actions. The 43% of all the sediment in the bay comes down the Susquehanna River over the Conowingo Dam. It's the #1 issue. It's been completely ignored for 8 years. We're going to push back to the federal government, both the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers, who's responsible for dredging these sediment ponds. We're going to push back to make sure that Pennsylvania and New York pay their fair share. That's one of the major problems we've had in cleaning up the bay and in protecting our environment. But the most important problem we've had is been the O'Malley-Brown administration. And this doesn't get a lot of attention. The media hasn't really focused on it. But this administration has raided $1.3 billion out of environmental trust funds. They took $460 million out of program open space. They took money out of the Chesapeake Restoration Fund. They took even money out of the Chesapeake Bay Trust. When you buy the tags with the Bay tags, they took the money out of there. $1.3 billion was raided in one of these trust fund grabs. And one thing we won't do, we won't raid the trust fund. We're going to try to replenish all the money, and we're going to focus on the real problems in the Bay. And that's what we're going to do in our administration. The rain tax is universally hated by most people in the state. That's the only solution that they've come up with. The rain that falls on your house, I can tell you that I've been going from one end of the state to the other. People everywhere just are disgusted with that, and that's not the only solution. We've got to do more.
Thank you, Mr. Hogan. Mr. Brown.
Larry, there you go again, painting a distorted picture. Maryland and the entire nation came through a great recession and protracted recovery. Except for education, no program didn't see, or said another way, every program saw a reduction in expenditures, and unfortunately, programs that protect the environment. Larry, you and I stand in two completely different places. I stand in the tradition of Marylanders who for centuries understand that we have to take a balanced approach to protecting the environment. You stand somewhere upstream in the Susquehanna River, pointing your finger at Pennsylvania and New York, accusing them of not doing what you're unwilling to do here in Maryland. We need a robust stormwater management facility program to reduce the stormwater that carries pollutants into the Bay. We need to work with farmers, the plowmen working with the fishermen, right? The farmers to reduce runoff, and we've done a great job with that, with cover crop, putting land into program open space, the manure transport program, and pesticide management. We've got work to do. We need to work with local governments, stormwater management. We need to work with developers to reduce the number of septics in developments. We need to continue the progress that we're making on upgrading clean water and wastewater treatment plants. Look, this is a balanced approach. This is assuming the responsibility. Why? Because a vibrant Chesapeake Bay and environment accounts for hundreds of businesses and tens of thousands of jobs in Maryland. You can't be pro-business and not be pro-environment in Maryland. Whether it's the maritime operations at the Port of Baltimore, the watermen, the restaurants, the hospitality industry, the tourism industry, it relies on a clean bay. We can't look to New York and Pennsylvania to do what you're not willing to do here in Maryland.
Mr. Hogan, your opportunity for rebuttal.
Well, that all sounded good, but a lot of it was nonsense. First of all, I do believe in a balanced approach. I'm not talking about just pushing everything off. I talked about the fact that you robbed $1.3 billion out of the environmental trust funds, that we could have really done a lot of great work in the Bay had we not done that. That's where the priority should be, number one. And then you went back to this again. You blamed it on the national recession and said we're recovering better, that you cut in every department. You didn't cut, Lieutenant Governor. You increased spending by $10 billion. That's more than 46 other states. When you go from a $29 billion budget to a $39 billion, it's not a cut. It's an increase. There wasn't any belt tightening. I mean, taxpayers who were struggling during the recession, they had to tighten their belts. They had to make tough decisions, but you didn't. Your decision was just to raise 40 taxes in a row and crush Maryland families and small businesses. You're talking about a balanced approach to business in the environment. Well, we've killed 8,000 businesses. We've lost 200,000 jobs. You just can't make things up. You can't talk about the past 8 years as if they didn't happen. Most states in the country are recovering. We're not. We're 49th out of 50 states.
Thank you, Mr. Hogan. Now, Mr. Brown, Maryland voters are concerned about the tone of this gubernatorial race. In fact, it's been called the most negative governor's race in the country. Diana in Cumberland, for example, asks, why did it come to this?
Diane, I believe that campaigns are conversations with voters about Maryland's future, conversation about record, how we build a better Maryland for more Marylanders. And I also believe that voters ought to know where candidates stand on a wide range of issues. It's not for a candidate to say that this issue is important in this election and another one isn't. So that's why we've made a point in the Brown-Ullman administration to highlight Mr. Hogan's record on important issues. Because either from Cumberland or further west in Oakland to Ocean City, Marylanders ask me, they say, Anthony, where are you on public safety and more specifically the Firearms Safety Protection Act of 2013? Because Mr. Hogan's not talking about it. So we share with them Mr. Hogan's record. Mr. Hogan said, and we have advertisements to communicate to voters, I don't support Senate Bill 281. Well, what was Senate Bill 281? Senate Bill 281 banned assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. Mr. Hogan opposed it. Senate Bill 281 would have required common sense background checks, including fingerprinting, and we fingerprint for over 130 reasons in Maryland. We can do that before we sell a gun. Mr. Hogan opposed it. Mr. Hogan opposes 281, which is common sense public safety measures for Maryland. Now, he'll tell you that we should rely on a federal database. Why should we rely on the federal government to protect our streets when we've got the tools to do it here? I think it's fair in campaigning to present to voters a contrast on issues. I supported the Firearms Safety Act of 2013. I'll fully enforce it. I'll fund the enforcement, and I'll hire people, unlike Mr. Hogan, who will fully enforce it and not try to roll it back by executive order.
Thank you. Mr. Hogan, your response.
Well, I think the question was about why the campaign is so negative, and that we have one of the most negative campaigns in the country, and I would agree with that. But it certainly hadn't been coming from our side. The commercials that we've run, for the most part, have been very positive and focused only on the economic issues that we think are important, that we think most Marylanders are focused on. My opponent, the Lieutenant Governor, who's unable and unwilling to talk about the serious economic problems of Maryland and unable to defend his 8-year record of failure, has chosen to try to distract voters away from those important issues and talk about things that are not nearly as much on the minds of the voters in Maryland, that he's twisting and putting out these commercials that are completely false. I mean, we held a press conference. We went through every single commercial. He has a new commercial out that has assault weapons in schoolyards by the swing set and in grocery stores, and says that I oppose background checks and that I want to put assault weapons in the hands of the mentally ill. I can assure you that's 100% false. Now, I didn't think that the SB 280, first of all, I'm the only Republican that ran in this race in the primary who said I would not repeal SB 281. So we're not rolling back anything, number one. Number two, I was concerned that the law didn't go far enough in keeping guns out of the hands of the mentally ill, and didn't do enough to ensure that we have instant point of sale background checks and join the federal NICS system, which 38 other states do. Maryland is the worst state in the country for reporting mental illness, which is a huge problem when we talk about these issues. I didn't think the bill addressed that, which is why I opposed it. But you say I have this long record. I'm a small businessman. I've never voted for anything. I'm just talking about my opinion on the bill, and I've been very clear about where it is. Your commercials on that and everything else are 100% misleading.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Hogan.
Rebuttal?
Rebuttal, yes.
Yeah. Look, opinions matter for a governor, and voters ought to know what your opinion is. You say publicly, as you did this evening, that you won't roll back the Firearms Safety Act, but you spoke to a group of extreme gun owners and said, don't worry, give me a pass in public, because when I'm governor, I'm going to use executive order to roll back the provisions of the Firearms Safety Act, and I will appoint a superintendent of the state police who will interpret the law in a way that guns will be back on the street. That was in a full expose by the Washington Post. This is not me making this up. You've also taken positions, you say a 30-year businessman. You've been a political operative for 30 years. You've taken a position, for example, to ban abortions, overturn Roe versus Wade, and to limit contraceptions. Now you're having this campaign year conversion where you say that, where you take a different position. How can the voters trust you if you're saying something different in public or 1 year and something different in private or another year? And voters ought to know. They ought to know your opinions, your beliefs, and what you'll vigorously enforce.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Andy?
All right, moving on to immigration. Governor Martin O'Malley has taken steps to welcome some of the unaccompanied minors who have crossed the border recently, and he has tried to marshal assistance for them once they're here. What would be your administration's policy toward these immigrants and others who lack legal status in the United States?
Well, first of all, I'm going to go back and take the privilege of responding to some of these off-base attacks that just came from the Lieutenant Governor. He says I have a 30-year record. I started a business 30 years ago, spent most of my entire life in the private sector. I did leave my business for 4 years to serve as a cabinet secretary. But he says that I oppose abortion even in the cases of rape and incest, and that I want to take away birth control. That is just absolutely not true. It's not my position now. It's never been my position in my entire life. You're taking some inaccurate article from 34 years ago that was referring to my father and not me. You know, I don't have a 30-year record of opposing this. I've said we're not going to roll back anything. Nothing is going to change with respect to reproductive rights, whether I'm governor or the lieutenant governor is elected. So that's another one of the false ads. It's just wrong. I think you should apologize to the women of Maryland for trying to scare them. Now let's go back to this issue on immigration. First of all, you know, we're a nation of immigrants. My wife, Yumi, who's here with me today, she's a first-generation American. She immigrated from South Korea. My family came from Ireland, all four of my grandparents. You know, we're a beacon of hope and freedom, and I understand why we want to be welcoming to immigrants who want to come to the United States. However, we're also a nation of laws. You know, so we've got to figure out. I don't blame people who want to come to the United States and break the rules. I understand they want a better life for themselves and their children. Who I blame is the President of the United States and the Congress, both Republicans and Democrats in Washington, for failing to come up with any kind of a comprehensive immigration policy or strategy, and for allowing it to happen.
Thank you, Mr. Hogan. Mr. Brown.
Thank you. I'm a first-generation American. My father came to this country out of poverty in Kingston, Jamaica, for a better way of life for himself and his family. He wanted to not only enjoy the benefits of America, but make a contribution to the greatness that is America. And this is a land of immigrants. Some of our families arrived 6 decades ago, like mine, some 6 weeks ago, and some centuries ago. But each of us has the opportunity, or should be afforded the opportunity, to make a contribution to the greatness that is our nation. There is failed immigration policy, or the inability to enact immigration reform in Congress. And that is really the source of the problem. And unfortunately, it's many of Mr. Hogan's Republican colleagues in Congress that refuse to pass meaningful reform. We're not going to fix that in Maryland. But the question is, what does the governor do to be able to manage undocumented immigrants who are in Maryland? And I think when we see children stranded at the border and the humanitarian crisis, that's Exhibit A of the failed policy. So how do we manage that? And I've laid out a framework for managing that. First and foremost, I think as people and as a nation, we have an obligation to protect children. We don't leave children stranded at the border, so we'll protect them. We'll reunite them with their families, because children do better when they're with their families. When it's safe to do so, we'll return them to their country of origin. And temporarily, when we can't do that, we'll have them in our foster care system or social service system, provided that the federal government reimburses Maryland for the entire cost. We've got a vibrant foster care system in Maryland. We can accommodate this small group of children. Let's protect them. Let's return them. Let's ensure that the federal government pays the full freight.
Okay, Mr. Hogan, rebuttal?
Well, you know, for the most part, we agree on that. The issue really is, I mean, obviously it's a humanitarian crisis, and it's a tremendous problem for the nation to have all these undocumented children crossing the border in waves. And you know, my first concern is the health and safety of these children, and we do have to look at that. And I wanted to make sure, as soon as they came across the border, that we took care of their immediate needs, that they were fed, that they were clothed, that they were housed, that we took care of any medical attention. But I don't think it made a lot of sense for Maryland to try to bring more of them to Maryland. We've taken 10 times more per capita than any other state, and I just don't think it's fair to the taxpayers in Maryland or to the children, really, to be bused thousands of miles away from their point of origin to be put into Maryland. It just didn't make sense to me. So we have a little bit of a disagreement there. We do want to take care of the kids, but I think you know, this administration's been too aggressive in trying to go after this.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hogan. Well, people watching.
Was there a rebuttal, or?
No,
there was a rebuttal.
Oh, that was rebuttal?
That was rebuttal,
okay.
Yes, sir. People watching us right now have a genuine concern about their safety, even though there are some crime statistics that show there has been a decrease in crime in the state of Maryland. Faith in Baltimore asks, what is your plan to address what appears to be a continuing crime problem in the state?
Sure. Faith, I understand that no family is immune from the tragedy of crime, and even violent crime. 6 years ago, my cousin Kathy was killed by her estranged boyfriend with a gun in front of 2 Montgomery County police officers, who in turn killed him. And because of that, I supported the Firearm Safety Act of 2013. I also led the effort in Maryland to give judges greater authority to order domestic abusers to surrender their firearms when they issue a protective order. Because of those measures and others, but perhaps more importantly, because of the courage of the men and women in law enforcement who are in communities around the state, we have driven crime down to levels that we haven't seen in 4 decades. But our work continues until every Marylander can walk outside of their home, on their porch, or on the corner of their street and say, this is the kind of neighborhood I want to raise my family, start a business, live, work, or play. So we have work to do. And that's why we can't roll back the provisions of the Firearms Safety Act, which I intend to fully enforce. And we're already beginning to see, after a year, a reduction in gun-related crimes in the state as a result of that. I also have a proposal to drive down recidivism. We're making a lot of progress in Maryland, but some states are doing better than us. So we're going to make sure that our reentry population doesn't commit crimes. We'll make sure they have the training, the support, so that they can once again be productive in our communities and rejoin their families, driving down recidivism. So there are a number of things that we can do, a number of proposals that I've offered. It builds on a lot of our successes, but you can rest assured I'll use every tool available, including gun safety laws, to make sure that you and every Marylander are living in a safer neighborhood.
Okay, thank you. Your response, Mr. Hogan.
Well, we've got some of the toughest gun safety laws in the entire country, but that hasn't stopped us from being one of the most violent states in the nation. And we're in the top 10 in violent crimes, in crimes committed with guns, and in murder. So, I'm not sure how much progress we've made. I know we've got a lot more to do. Crime is a serious problem here in Maryland, and I've been traveling all across the state. I've talked with people in urban areas, in rural and suburban areas, and I've met with local police departments and sheriffs and state's attorneys. And I can tell you that the #1 problem we have here in Maryland with respect to crime is heroin. We've got an epidemic of heroin. We've recently been called the heroin capital of the United States. And it's not just happening in inner city Baltimore and in urban areas. This is infiltrated into small communities all across the state. I was up in Frederick and toured the jail, where 60% of the people there are gang-related and drug-related with heroin. I was in St. Mary's County in southern Maryland, and they said 60% of the problems that they're dealing with there are as a result of heroin. I was in Caroline County, one of the smallest counties on the Eastern Shore, and I said, what's the #1 problem facing your community? And they said heroin. Look, we've got the #1 problem in the United States. Every state on the East Coast has declared a state of emergency on this problem. Our administration currently has done nothing and hasn't taken action, even though we're the worst in the country. So one thing I'll do immediately is get to work. We are going to call a state of emergency in January. We're going to bring a summit together to bring all the parties. We're going to look at this problem of violent crime, drugs, and gangs that are infiltrating our state.
Okay. Mr. Brown, rebuttal.
Larry, it's disappointing when you say that you don't know how much progress that we've made, because I think it's incumbent upon you and I to inform ourselves of the issues so that we know what the true challenges are. Because the facts are, we've driven crime down to the lowest levels in 4 decades. We've driven down crime against women and children to levels we haven't seen in quite some time. And why are we doing it? So I understand we're making progress, and I understand why. Because we're taking guns off the streets. We're protecting victims of domestic violence. We're putting more into drug treatment and addiction counseling in the institutions and in the communities than ever before. We've got skills training in the institutions and partnerships with the nonprofit community in the community. That's why recidivism has gone from 50% to 40%. You have to understand that as a governor, because perhaps the most important responsibility we have is to ensure the public safety. So you have to understand what's working and what's not working. Sure, we've driven recidivism down. We've got more work to do. Sure, we've driven crime down. We've got more work to do. You've got to understand the problem.
Thank you. Andy.
Maryland's congressional districts have been ranked among the most gerrymandered in the nation. If you were governor, would you commit to changing the way Maryland draws its congressional and legislative district lines?
Absolutely, I would. My entire campaign has been about nonpartisanship. 3.5 years ago, I started a group called Change Maryland, which is the largest nonpartisan citizen group in state history. We've got 117,000 people involved, and half of them are Democrats and independents. My whole life has been about reaching across the aisle and trying to do what's right and coming up with common sense bipartisan solutions. The partisan redistricting that was done here in Maryland was probably the worst in the entire country, and it's not something that should ever happen again. And I would definitely take these decisions out of the hands of the monopoly and the politicians in Annapolis and put it into an independent body of some kind. I think we need to take action. There are a lot of proposals around the country. I would absolutely support removing the redistricting process out of the hands of politicians and putting it into a group that could make honest decisions.
Okay. Thank you.
I support an independent commission as well, and I've said that over the course of this campaign. I think it's the right thing to do for a number of reasons. I think it gives greater confidence in Maryland voters in the way that we redistrict. But it also, I believe, addresses the dysfunction that we're seeing in our nation's capital. You're having members of Congress who now represent some extreme right and left districts, and I think that's why you don't have immigration reform, you don't have a national energy policy, and a number of other important things that ought to be happening in Washington, but are not. So I will certainly create an independent commission. Don't want to get too far out in front, because remember, that's going to be in the second term of the Brown-Ullman administration around the census, so it won't be in the immediate future. But I support an independent commission. But I also support what at least one or two Supreme Court justices are calling for, which is an amendment to the U.S. Constitution, because we can fix redistricting in Maryland, instill greater confidence among Maryland voters, but we still need to address the larger national problem, so that in Washington, where the redistricting has resulted in dysfunction, we can get back to the business of doing work in Washington, which quite frankly isn't happening today.
Mr. Hogan, any rebuttal?
Well, first of all, again, the Lieutenant Governor doesn't want to claim any responsibility. He agrees that now we ought to do something about the terrible redistricting, but it took place during his administration. He and Governor O'Malley presided over these worst districts that were drawn in the entire country. So I do agree with him, though, on the dysfunction in Washington. I mean, I can tell you, I talk to people every single day who are just completely fed up with professional politicians, and they feel as if our elected leaders are not solving the problems. And they're angry, quite frankly, with Republicans and Democrats. And that's why I've been focused on nonpartisanship. And I think that's what most people in Maryland would like to see, instead of the rabid partisanship in Washington and the monopoly that's in Annapolis that doesn't have any real honest and open debate and doesn't have any real competition, no checks and balances. That's one of the reasons why I'm running for governor.
Well, gentlemen, we talked about this a little bit at the top of this debate. Let's get a little deeper into it. What are your plans to improve the business climate so that more businesses do not leave Maryland and take jobs with them?
Sure. And again, I think Mr. Hogan and I agree fundamentally that we need to strengthen Maryland's business climate. There are some aspects of our business climate where we're very strong. We've got a quality workforce, second to none. We're making investments in infrastructure, Maryland's quality of life. There are other areas where we certainly need dramatic improvements, like the regulatory environment. We can streamline regulations in Maryland, make it more cost-effective for businesses to comply. We can do that without running away from our obligations to protect the environment or consumers and the workforce. So we can do that. Ken Ullman and I have stated, we have declared that in a Brown-Ullman administration, the very first strategic goal that we announce, and every organization needs to declare strategic goals, and you develop the metrics and you drive the metrics towards a goal. Our first strategic goal will be to position Maryland's business climate to be #1 in the nation. Now look, there's a raging debate whether Maryland's business climate is hostile to businesses or whether it's business friendly. Ken and I aren't participating in that debate. Our focus is on whether you believe we're hostile or not. Let's improve the business climate so that BMW can expand its footprint as it does. So more Amazons will come to Maryland. So Under Armour, which just announced an expansion. Lockheed Martin has just announced an expansion of operations in Baltimore County. Volvo Mac in Washington County. Frito-Lay in Hartford County. So you've got corporations that see a tremendous amount of strength in our business climate and are expanding and investing. But I think all of us can agree we've got to strengthen our business climate.
Mr. Hogan.
Well, I guess my question would be to the Lieutenant Governor, why haven't you strengthened the business climate? Because it's your policies, it's your regulatory environment, it's your anti-business attitude and your onerous tax policy that have driven 8,000 businesses out of the state. It's caused us to double unemployment and lose 200,000 jobs. You're now saying you want to make us #1 for business, but you killed 8,000 businesses. I mean, how is it going to change over the next 4 years from what you did over the past 8 years? You've got some responsibility there. You're going to create all these jobs. Well, why did we almost lead the nation in job loss 2 months ago? Why have we lost 200,000 jobs? Why are we higher than the national average on unemployment? what's going to be different over the next 4 years? Look, this is the main reason why I got in this race. I started this group Change Maryland 3.5 years ago. We've been focused on how to make Maryland more competitive. My organization, we held a business summit on improving Maryland's economic competitiveness 2 years in a row, where we brought in 400 business leaders together with economists and think tanks and the representatives of the federal, state, and local government from both parties, and we talked about this. We've got 3 fundamental problems. One, according to CEO Magazine, we're 41st out of 50 states in business friendliness. And that will change on day one with me as governor, because Maryland will be open for business. And we're going to focus on how to bring more businesses to Maryland, how to help our existing businesses grow and create more opportunities and more jobs for our citizens. 2, the regulatory environment that you say you want to try to clean up and streamline is the one that you created over the past 8 years. And it's driven a lot of businesses out of the state. I talk to people who say they moved to Virginia and got things done in 90 days that they couldn't get done in 3 years in Maryland, because the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, and they're running around changing the rules all the time. Lastly, it's our onerous tax policy. We're the 4th highest tax state in the nation.
Thank you very much,
it's
Mr.
causing businesses to flee the state.
Thank
An
you.
entire minute and a half, and you didn't put out a single proposal to strengthen Maryland's business climate. You asked a lot of questions.
I just talked about 3.
But not a single proposal. Look, you and I agree that we can strengthen our business climate by providing tax relief, but we disagree on how. You would start with the largest corporations, a small group, the wealthiest, many of whom have headquarters out of the state of Maryland, and you would give them a $300 million annual tax giveaway. You said it in September. You would roll back that tax from 8.25 to 6%. In fact, you said in the spring that you would try to completely eliminate the corporate income tax, and that would just put a gaping hole in the next governor's budget. I don't support that. I support tax relief for small and entrepreneurial businesses that create 2 out of every 3 middle-class jobs and provide opportunities to working families. That's how we're going to create a stronger business climate in Maryland.
Andy.
All right. Each of you has served in an administration from each party. Mr. Hogan, could you tell me a policy of the Ehrlich administration with which you disagreed, and Mr. Brown, a policy of the O'Malley administration with which you disagreed? And if either one of you happens to agree with something that the other party did while in power, we'd be delighted to hear it.
Well, that's a tough question. Well, first of all, you know, I had the honor of serving for 4 years as a cabinet secretary in the Ehrlich administration. I agreed with a lot of the things that they did. I can tell you one thing that I didn't agree with, and something the Lieutenant Governor brought up earlier. Tuitions went up 40% under the Ehrlich administration. I was never supportive of it, have never supported 1 penny in tuition increases at any point in my entire life. And in fact, I've been the leading voice of opposition to the 5 years in a row that the Lieutenant Governor and the Governor have raised tuition. So that'd be the #1 issue. As far as something that they've done well, I think they've done a pretty good job of spinning the numbers and confusing people on the facts. That's the only thing I can point to.
Great.
Mr. Brown.
So let me sort of explain a relationship that a governor has with a lieutenant governor. And I was asked once, are you prepared to be lieutenant governor? I said probably the best experience I had that prepared me was when I was an executive officer in a company when I was in the military. And it was the company commander's company. I had the privilege of going into the closed doors with the company commander and telling them and sharing with him, how do we take care of soldiers? How do we do the mission? How do we ensure we have the resources? And at the end of the day, the company commander made a decision, and we both walked out the door, and I supported the company commander's decision in effectively leading that company. So that's a lot the way that a governor, lieutenant governor works. Having said that, there are a few things where I disagreed with Governor O'Malley, and one of them, for example, was reducing deductions on the income tax, which was interpreted by some as the mortgage interest deduction. I didn't agree with that, and I was very pleased that the legislature took that out of the proposal. We were able to balance our budget and meet the needs of Marylanders, and we didn't need that provision. I'm glad it came out. I wasn't coming out of the door and throwing my governor under the bus, and I hope that whoever the next lieutenant governor is understands that important relationship between governor and lieutenant governor. What do I agree with from the Ehrlich administration that Mr. Hogan was a part of? And you guys did raise tuition by 40%, and you appointed 10 of the 14. And you never stood up and said, hey, look, this isn't the way to go. But I understand, because you were being a loyal appointment secretary. The Chesapeake Restoration Fund, which gives Maryland now the resources to invest in upgrading wastewater plants.
Thank you. Unfortunately, because of time, we're going to move on to the next question. There won't be a rebuttal on this one. There's been a lot of talk about women's issues, ranging from equal pay to birth control. Kimberly in Aberdeen asks, what is your priority?
My priority is to ensure, thank you, Kimberly. My priority is to ensure that when we build a better Maryland for more Marylanders, that's all Marylanders. There are some things that are happening very well in Maryland. For example, the poverty rate for women is the lowest in Maryland, the lowest in the nation. We have a higher percentage of women who sit on corporate boards and in senior positions. And we've made the greatest strides, I think, along with Hawaii, in reducing the gender wage gap. But we've got more work to do. That's why I supported raising the minimum wage, which Mr. Hogan opposed. Why? Because the composite, if you will, the average minimum wage earner is a 33-year-old single woman. She was making minimum wage, which was less than the federal poverty level, and unable to provide for her family. So I supported giving her and 455,000 other Marylanders a raise out of poverty. Studies show that it boosts our economy and it creates jobs. It's good for women. It's good for the economy. I've led the effort in reducing domestic violence in Maryland. A number of measures, support services for victims, programs in hospitals, giving judges the authority to order abusers to surrender firearms. And this year, finally, after 19 years of failed effort, we were able to finally have Maryland join the ranks of all other states in the District of Columbia. We reduced the standard of proof for a woman to get a protective order in a domestic violence case. That is tremendous progress for victims of domestic violence, both men and women, but we know that a disproportionate number of victims are women. So whether we're talking about economic issues, whether we're talking about educational opportunities, health opportunities, I will continue to be on the side of Maryland's women.
Thank you. Mr. Hogan.
Well, first of all, I agree with a lot of what the Lieutenant Governor just said, and I think he has done a good job with respect to some domestic violence initiatives, and we talked about that just a few days ago when we kicked off Domestic Violence Month and talked about some of the things that they had done well. I'm talking to folks all around the state, and women are really the ones that are most concerned about our economy. Women in Maryland are faced with, first of all, most households in Maryland are headed by women. And then in all households, just about, women make a lot of the financial decisions. And they're the ones that are suffering as a result of 40 consecutive tax hikes that have just crushed struggling families. Most of these are regressive taxes that hurt people at the lower end of the income scale. The number one issue, the number one women's issue, in my opinion, is getting our economy back on track, putting women back to work so that they can support their families. With respect to the minimum wage, first of all, I've said we're not going to do anything to change the minimum wage legislation. It is going to help. It is going to help some people at the lower end of the income scale, but there are drawbacks. I mean, people estimate that we may lose 12,000 jobs as a result. You mentioned that the average minimum wage earner is a 33-year-old single mom. Well, it shouldn't be that way. Minimum wage was designed for kids to get their first opportunity to join the workforce. And if we could restore our economy and bring businesses back and create better paying jobs, then we wouldn't have to deal with this issue. Lastly, I support unfettered access to birth control for every single woman in Maryland, contrary to the commercials that my opponent has been running. And in fact, we support over-the-counter birth control paid for by insurance. We're going to do nothing to roll back women's reproductive rights in spite of the attacks from my opponent.
Okay. Thank you. Gentlemen, we've reached the point where we are to begin our closing statements. Mr. Hogan, you'll go first.
Well, folks, this election is not really just your typical fight between Democrats and Republicans. It's more important than that. This is a fight for Maryland's future, and it's a fight worth fighting. The decision that we make in just 28 days will have a lasting impact on the future of our state. It's an important decision, and I believe that the voters of Maryland need to just make a simple choice. It really all comes down to this. If you're comfortable with the status quo, if you're happy with the direction that our state is heading, and you believe that a third term of O'Malley Brown policies would be good for you, your family, your future, and our state, then you should probably vote for my opponent. But if you agree with me that things are way off track, heading in the wrong direction, and that new leadership is needed in Annapolis, it doesn't matter what part of the state you live in or what your party affiliation is, you need to vote to bring about that change. So I'm asking, if you want to bring real change to Maryland, I'm asking for your vote on November 4. Thank you.
Mr. Hogan. Mr. Brown.
Thank you. I believe firmly that every Marylander should be able to pursue the American dream, where when you work hard, play by the rules, sacrifice when necessary, you can not only pursue, but achieve your dreams. My parents came to this country 6 decades ago in pursuit of that dream. Marylanders do have a choice in November, and the choice is whether to embrace the vision that Ken Ullman and I share with countless Marylanders across the state, where we'll get up every morning fighting for working families and middle-class values, or whether we favor large corporations and the privileged few. Are we going to fund pre-K or give a $300 million corporate tax giveaway? Are we going to keep our streets safe by ensuring that guns are off our streets? Or do we go backwards to the days that nobody wants to return to? I need your vote in 4 weeks. I need your help in the next 4 weeks. But more importantly, Ken Ullman and I need you each and every day for the next 4 years, as together we build a better Maryland for more Marylanders.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. Of course, we would like to thank both of the candidates. And